Welcome to Red Zone in the Lab. I'm Deuce, and the Commanders need help. We need to get younger, faster, more athletic, more explosiveness. As Adam Peters said, and the quickest way to do that is through the draft. So we have PFSN's NFL draft analyst Ian Cummings joining us to help us get through the prospects that can help us get there right after this. Let's get to it. Thanks for joining us today, Ian. How are you today? I know this is a very exciting time for you. We got some interviews going on. You know, everybody about to put they shorts and tank tops on for tomorrow at the combines. Must be an exciting time for you.
Yeah, it's one of the big checkpoints of any NFL offseason, and when I was first starting in the draft space, I was a little, I won't say I was more excited about the combine, but I think the combine was, you always gravitate to the testing numbers and things like that, right? The measurements and all the new information that we get. But I feel like you also need to be measured about the combine and what it is. It's a cross-checking evaluation at the end of the day. It's not the end-all be-all, and you always have to return to the tape no matter what. But it's a really valuable exercise for contextualizing information, getting more information, and filling those boxes. And for the teams in particular, the medicals, the interviews, that's just as crucial. So it's a fun time, best time of the year, and happy to be breaking it down with you here today.
How does the process of the invites work, right? Like who decides who's going to be invited to the combine, and the ones that what we call snubs, like you mentioned Landon Robinson being one of them, how does that affect their draft evaluation?
Yeah, so and I'll preface by saying this: I'm not an expert on the combine invite process. I'll need to dive in a little bit more. But to my understanding, I think people from all 32 teams get a vote on who is set to be there, on who they would like to be there, and it's not, theoretically you could withhold a vote from someone if you wanted to, hide them or have them be a, kind of under the radar player who you can target on day 3. But also it's highly unlikely that someone who is of interest is unlikely to get a vote or enough votes across all 32 teams, right? So I think it is in general, an NFL Combine invite, it can be it's trying to think of the word here. It's a sufficient representation of someone having legitimate NFL interest, right? Now, is it the end all be all for their stock and what they're going to do at the NFL level? Of course not. There have been plenty of NFL Combine snubs who have gone on to be productive players at the NFL level. One of the more recent examples from my perspective is Kobe Turner, who played at Wake Forest and was drafted by the Rams and was one of the top sack getters among interior defensive linemen last year. So, it's not the end all be all. It's not a referendum on you if you don't make the NFL Combine. And there were more than a few Senior Bowl standouts from this year and Shrine Bowl standouts who didn't make it to the Combine either, right? So, there's talent wherever you look. The NFL Combine and receiving an invite can be a great barometer for that. But again, it's not, you take a case by case with every player. And I think that's always the same. It does seem like the NFL Combine with the invites, there is some deference toward big blue blood programs, power forward programs, and kind of away from FCS and smaller schools and things like that. But, it's one of those things where you look at it, you get information from that, but you don't let it define your process. You don't let it tip the scale where it doesn't need to.
When it comes to player comps, right? Yeah. PFSN you all put some player comps out a few weeks ago. What's the process in going into player comps? Because I think sometimes, people see a measurable and say, "Oh yeah, this is this person." But what is your process with player comps?
Yeah, so I've kind of come around to player comps, I would say. When I was first starting out, I was always avoiding them. I was like, you can't find a perfect representation. And it's true, you can't find a perfect one-to-one representation for a player more often than not. But the more that I've gotten into the draft space and into evaluation, I've warmed up to player comps more because I think if you do enough research, if you do your due diligence, you can find at least a strong enough match where you can communicate what you need to communicate, because that's what a player comp is doing. Ideally, at the end of the day, you communicate, I think, a player's athletic and physical makeup, right? Ideally, my comps are going to generally line up more or less from a size perspective, length, athleticism, but also brand of mobility is really important. You can have a wide receiver who's 6'3", 200 with 33-inch arms, who is explosive and quick-footed and not lumbering. And then you can have another one who you turn on the tape and he's kind of a slow strider, a little more lumbering, not as fluid on transitions. So guys who are sized similarly can move in very different ways. So my comps ideally communicate athletic and physical skill sets, brands of mobility, and then potential outcomes and production, right? What can you expect from this player at the NFL level, right? So if I would comp a player to someone who made 4 Pro Bowls, that is a general representation of what I think they're going to do, right? My comp for Jeremiah Love is Amon Green, who was, I think, a multi-time Pro Bowl and an All-Pro for the Green Bay Packers. Like, that's the kind of upside that this guy has. And if you're confident with your evaluation, obviously a player comp is an endpoint for any evaluation. You don't want to start with a comp and then build your evaluation around that, because that comp that you make at the beginning is kind of anchoring in your brain, right? You're motivated to legitimize it, right? So you shouldn't, it's an endpoint, not a starting point. It should be the end cap to any evaluation that's thorough and goes through the tape. But ideally, once you have that comp, and I think once you do your due diligence, comps can be very valuable for, again, communicating athletic, physical makeup, brand of mobility, potential outcomes, and also schematic fits, right? Like, is he a 3-4 outside linebacker? Is he a Mike, a Will, a Sam? Is he more of a hybrid slot, or can he play the X out wide, right? So all of these things, a player comp can very efficiently communicate that, because I can tell you this player is this, and you're like, okay, I know what that looks like, right? I've seen that before. Obviously, there are a lot of risks for it. There are a lot of potential pitfalls if you don't have the right one. So me personally, I hold myself to a pretty high standard with comps. I make sure, and sometimes I get carried away. I look at too much like archive footage, like looking at how guys move and win, because it's important, right? You want to communicate the right things. Yeah. So, but that's kind of my thought process on comps. It needs to communicate all of these different things, and if it does that, then it's something I can roll with.
I have 3 players that I would like for you to give comps, and we're going to start with Rueben Bain. Like, the thing with him coming into this draft is his arm length, and he mentioned today that no one asked him about his arm length with the teams that he's spoken to. Are you looking at him more inside or outside, and who would you comp him to?
Yeah, so I'm looking at him more as an outside player. I do think situationally he can play inside. If you're looking at a wide zone look and he needs to encumber a combo block or a double team, I do think he's the type of player, when he has more of a runway laterally, he can do those things. I think for an edge rusher, he's unnaturally stout and dense, right? Being around, probably, it's going to be interesting to see what he measures in at, but probably around 6'2", over 270. Arms could be under 32 inches, but you're still looking at a guy who's sawed off. He can win the leverage battle with infallible consistency, and those things are always valuable in the trenches, specifically inside. But I look at his ability as a pass rusher, and I think my opinion is that he functions best when he has a runway to accelerate, right? I think his brand of mobility, if we're comparing it to, say, a David Bailey, who is likely to be, not likely, he is a odd front, wide alignment rusher, right? That he functions better with space to work, but he's that hyper explosive, hyper energized mover with the quick twitch and the bend. Ruben Bane isn't quite that, but I still think when he has space to operate, he has that bounding explosion that, it catches you by surprise, because he's not moving with the same amount of pace, but he's still covering a ton of ground off his first steps. And I think he functions a lot better when he has that runway to fully accelerate from wider alignments, 7 tech, 9 tech, right? Because then he can channel that into additional power capacity, right? We talk about power and force. Football is physics at the end of the day, right? If you're an explosive athlete and you have more space to gain more momentum, that's going to allow you to siphon more force at the contact point. And I think Rueben Bain in particular really benefits from that. So I think I would lean toward more of a full-time edge role for sure. I think the role that he played at the collegiate level will help with that. And in particular as an edge setter too, like setting the edge, fully stacking and establishing half-man relationships, but then also, holding strong and limiting displacement against combos and double teams on the outside. He's incredible at that. He's elite at that, but then also has that pass rushing ability when he has a run like to accelerate. So in certain situations, I think you can kick him inside if you want. I think you can utilize him on stunts if you need to, but generally, I think the role that's going to play to his strengths the most is an outside role. So my comp for him would be Brandon Graham. I think I've oscillated through different names with him, but I look at Brandon Graham and the impact that he had for such a long time at the NFL level. And he was a guy who could kick inside on a situational basis, but in general, he's that well-leveraged, sawed-off player, didn't have the arm length, but again, had the red-hot motor, had the bounding explosive element, and had the pass rush arsenal where he could disrupt one-on-one if you needed him to. So I love all of those elements of Bain's game, and I know he's been a little polarizing at times. There was that down swell through the middle stretch of the season, but he came back with a vengeance in the CFB playoffs, and ultimately, I don't think there are too many red flags. He's a top 12 player for me and a guy who I think can be an instant disruptor at the NFL level.
The next is former safety linebacker Sonny Styles. And this year, there was a Texas, I think it was a A&M left tackle that was doing some center stuff this past year, and I think he played center. Yeah, okay, yeah, I knew it was somebody, and I know he played. And I looked, I said, wow, left tackle to center, and I saw that he did play center one game last year. Mm-hmm. But over the last few, because the Commanders, like we had Connolly, right, left tackle his coach career, go to Senior Bowl, he's at right tackle. How does that process work, and do you see it increasing over the years? How do you evaluate that?
Yeah, I'll say on the position switch thing, I'll start with that, and then I'll go to Sonny Styles because he's a unique one too, going from safety to linebacker. Position switches aren't anything new. We've seen it for a long time, and I go back to when I was just starting out with. Fun fact, I started writing for a Washington site when I first got into the sports media business, and when I remember. Around the time that I was writing for Washington, Eric Flowers came over from the Giants, and he played tackle with the Giants, and then he kicked inside the guard, right? I know not the most glowing example, but, position switches happen.
He played really well, though.
He had a small stretch where he was actually a really solid player. Yeah, so shout out Eric Flowers, that one half year stretch, man. He was a good guard, but, position switches are nothing new, right? I think in general, players, when they get experience at a certain position at the collegiate level, they get more comfort there, but it doesn't mean that their best projection is at that spot, right? So that's kind of part of what the evaluation process is for. And in particular, offensive linemen, it hits them hard, right? Because you have guys who play tackle their entire career, right? Trey Zune is one who's primarily a tackle, but again, especially this past year, played more at center. But I look at Cage Casey from Boise State. 41 games started with the Broncos, all at left tackle, and he's probably going to kick inside to guard. Carver Willis from Washington, another one who played mostly tackle, and he's going to kick inside to guard probably, or even center at the next level. So, the reasoning behind position switches, right? What a player did primarily at the collegiate level does not necessarily discern where they're going to play at the NFL level, because you're projecting off of traits and off of what they bring to the table, right? And where, what their skill set is. And if you have an offensive lineman, I think the main factors kicking guys inside, sometimes it's arm length. We see that a lot. If guys don't have the requisite arm length, I don't think that alone is necessarily a factor for guys to go inside. I don't think it should be alone, because you do see players like Rashawn Slater. When he was healthy, he was a phenomenal player for the Chargers and had, I think, at most 33-inch arms, probably a little bit under, but like he counteracted that with athleticism, with proper leverage play, with hand placement, with technical refinement, right? And then balance too. So Francis Mauigoa from this year's class is another one who has the shorter arms, but probably has the traits that are necessary to counteract it. With Will Campbell, that was a big debate for him. And I know the Super Bowl is gonna start to drudge that up again. Where his arm length was not great, but I don't think the arm length alone is what caused those issues that could kick him inside, right? So arm length can be an issue, but I also think if you see a tackle moving inside to guard, sometimes it's flexibility limitations, right? They're not quite as good as at turning their hips outside of the apex when you have a speed rusher and you need to get depth quickly, right? Sometimes it could be simple, refinement issues. Like he's not quite as refined as you'd want him to be with his hands, and probably functions better in a phone booth where he has help on either side and he can just win with physical traits. Isaiah World from Oregon is one of those candidates in this class, I think, where he's not quite as refined, but he still has the domineering physical skill set. So you'd like to think he can function well in a phone booth. But all of this is to say there's many different reasons for a position switch in any circumstance. But it all goes down to the bare diagnostics, right? And in Trey Zune's case, I do think it's a little bit of a, he doesn't quite have the arm length for his height that you would want, right? The proportional length. And then I also think the hip flexibility and the athleticism is not quite at that elite level where he can function and survive on island, especially with his taller frame that kind of inhibits leverage acquisition, right? So it's something different for every prospect. But the key is asking, all right, he played this position mostly in college. How does he project at that position in the NFL against superior talent, right? So that's the question that you need to ask for any player who's doing a position switch, and that's kind of where that discussion originates. In the case of Sonny Styles, he was a really, really exciting one because he kicked down to linebacker from safety and ended up being an all-league player, one of the best players in college football this past year, and his film is insane, man. Like I remember watching him in the early goings of the season, thinking like, oh, like he's a little underrated. You look at his film, and it's just so clean, and he's talented too. But the more you rewatch, the less you can ignore it or turn away from it until you have to say like, oh, this guy's a top 5 player in the class. Like, what are we doing here, right? So, upon regrading, he ended up being my number 2 overall player. I'm a big fan of what he has to offer. I think at 6'4", some measurements even say 6'5". So I'm really interested to see what he measures in at with the length and the height, because the dude is different. Like he's just built different. He's got that lean mass, that length, but then he's really fluid for his size too, right? And that's where the question marks come with the comp. Like, what do you comp this guy to, right? I know because of the former safety element, a lot of people have said Fred Warner, which is a very exciting comp. I think Sonny Styles is somehow bigger than Fred Warner, right? So he's bigger, he's longer, but I also don't think he's quite as fluid. I think Fred Warner is kind of the one of one there as far as coverage mobility. As much as I love Sonny Styles in coverage, I think the safety background helps him a lot. I do think we overinflate the fluidity a little bit because we can say, oh, he's a former safety. He's very good, but I don't think he's quite at Fred Warner's level, right? So that was kind of a sticking point for me trying to find a comp for Sonny Styles, but I ended up landing on, and there's a caveat with this comp, right? It's a very specific window, but Leighton Vander Esch was drafted by the Cowboys in round 1. And that first year he made the Pro Bowl. He was on an astronomical trajectory going off of that year. Unfortunately, injuries, we know what happened. Injuries affected his career. He was never the same player. He can never really stay available consistently, but think of that peak Leighton Vander Esch, right? He was around 6'3", almost 6'4". Oh, I think he was close to 250. He had over 34-inch arms coming out. And then athletically in that first year, like I think it's a pretty close match to Sonny Styles. I think Styles might run a little faster in the 40 if he does run, but I still think Leighton Vander Esch had that closing explosiveness, that recalibration quickness, right? And then enough fluidity to reduce and redirect in coverage and put the drapes on, intermediate targets too. And then the physicality coming downhill, the ability to sack and shed in the run game, and then the ability to serve as a pass rush catalyst every now and again as a blitzer, right? All of those things, the physical components, the mental components, and then the ideal outcome, if he can stay healthy. I think all of those things line up with Sonny Styles. So it's kind of exciting. Leighton Vander Esch was a really good player in his prime, like a really, I think pretty underrated. We forget how good he was in that short stretch. But I think Sonny Styles can give us another go at that. And we can really see, all right, this size speed freak with also elite football IQ, this is the kind of player he can be, right? So my number 2 overall prospect, I think he has all pro potential. And if you're a team, like I know off-ball linebacker, the positional value is always kind of consternated at this point. But if you're a team that has the ability to spend on that luxury, he can be a central player for a defense and a difference maker for a long time.
All right. The next is Arvell Reese. Are you profiling him more as an edge or as a linebacker?
Yeah, it's a good question. I know that's the debate that's kind of taken hold for this entire cycle. I'm on the fence a little bit, and sometimes I sit on the fence too much, so I apologize in advance for that. But Arvell Reese is interesting because he played primarily as an attacking off-ball Sam linebacker at Ohio State, right? Where 6'4", over 240. He doesn't quite have the mass that you would expect from a full-time edge rusher, but you watch the film and this dude is built out of titanium. I mean, his stacking strength is certifiably insane. One of the highest play strength numbers that I've ever given to a linebacker, an off-ball linebacker. I mean, that power element that he brings to contact, he can just sledge tackles upright immediately, and then he can stack and shed. He can make tackles in pursuit. He's got that apex predator closing speed and corrective quickness, and then the play strength as a tackler. And then also as a blitzer, you see the flashes as a pass from a pass rushing standpoint. Like he's got that hyper elite explosion. He's got enough cornering ability for sure. I think in particular against Drew Shelton in Penn State midway through the season, he really showed that. There were a couple reps where he rushed from 7-tech straight downhill to the apex against Shelton and was able to corner, reduce, get inside the pocket, and turn that tight angle and get to the QB. And that's what you're looking for, man. It's the raw power element. So it kind of goes back to the conversation we had about just general position switches. When you're embarking on a position switch, you're projecting off of the raw diagnostics. Does this guy have the raw diagnostic elements that would lend well to surviving at the next position, right? We can go back to Abdul Carter if we're looking for an off-ball to edge transition. And of course, his transition was different because we had a full season of edge work to work with at Penn State. But even going back to his second to last year, 2023, at off ball, like his closing speed was insane. His cornering ability was definitely there when he was able to pin his ears back and blitz. And then he had the compact play strength for his size and the natural leverage, right? So you're thinking to yourself, in these small instances, right? He definitely shows the diagnostic traits. There are flashes of pass rush nuance and hand usage too. And it turns out that he could translate, right? He ended up being a top 5 pick. So you look at Arvell Reese's tape. I think comparing the two, Arvell Reese is not as refined as a pass rusher, which is expected because he hasn't been a full-time edge rusher before, right? He has the power element, he has the explosion and the bend, but you're still waiting for him to put it all together, right? And then the question is, well, can he? And there's no succinct answer for that right now. Part of it depends on where he lands and the schematic frameworks and the coaching, right? But as a project, you look at the immediately translatable play strength, the hyper elite explosion, and the power profile, and that he can size up well immediately at the NFL level. And then you look at the physical disposition, the tenacity that he plays with in the trenches. I have no concerns about his projection if he is moved to edge full time. But also, I think if you look at him as an off-ball linebacker, he's a really solid prospect there too. I think he gets underrated a little bit there as well. Because again, he has that line resetting stacking strength on the attack, and in pursuit, he's a menace with his closing speed and his ability to wrangle guys all the way to the sideline. And then he's got decent coverage ability too. Styles is definitely better in coverage, but I think Arvell Reese is a little understated there. He's very solid with his depth discipline. And again, he's got that closing speed coming downhill toward the ball. So I don't think there's a wrong answer right now. I would probably... Here's the thing: if you transition him to edge, you got to have a plan for him. But I can see the vision ultimately. So my comp for him has been kind of a Jamie Collins 2.0, right? Like if we remember what Jamie Collins was at his peak at the NFL level, it was a player who could size up in run defense situations from off-ball positions, but also provide a pass rush catalyst when he needed to. And I think Arvell Reese has the potential to be that true X factor. He's not there yet, but I do think the raw diagnostics are more than exciting enough to bank on and gamble on. And if you get him in the right environment with the right coaching, the right usage, and the right plan, it can pay dividends for you tenfold. What I'll say is, whenever you see a player who's shifting positions, look for the bedrock foundational traits that lend well to that position switch, right?
When it comes to players that possess tons of talent, but they've shown to be injured more often than not, similar to Jordyn Tyson's, how does that affect your grading process on those type of players?
Yeah, so, and this is something that I've been kind of exploring a little more this cycle in particular. I didn't used to grade medicals, and it's very difficult to, right? Especially for someone on the outside. Like NFL teams will have more in-depth medical information that we won't always be privy to. So It's like, I accept that. I understand that. But also, to a degree, you can delineate which injuries have potential degenerative effects and which ones don't, right? I think like a foot injury, a Liz Frank, right? Like that's something that can be an issue year over year. It can linger. A torn ACL in general, players, when given enough time, if it's a clean tear and you can have successful surgery, there usually isn't too bad of a prognosis there, right? And then things like a collarbone break, like Jordyn Tyson had, like those things you can come back to 100% from, right? But then also there's an element of, well, there aren't any degenerative issues with the serious injuries that he's had, but he's also struggled to stay fully healthy. And that part of Jordyn Tyson's eval is true. Like he had this serious injury in his first year, but then he never played a full season after that either. Every year he was missing time for something or something else. And at a certain point, you have to wonder, like, yes, the medical checks might not show anything blatantly degenerative, but what if this guy is just fragile, right? And so it's a concern that every team has to have, and every team will have different frameworks and guardrails for it. As far as my grading scale goes, I try to have tiered grades tiered grade penalties for certain injuries. Like if you have an injury that's proven to be degenerative, right? Like you might have a greater grade penalty than you would if it's, oh, you missed 4 games in your final season, and it's something that you can come back to 100% from, right? So you have to take every single instance on a case-by-case basis, and it's difficult because there's a certain level of entropy with injuries, right? To a certain point, we can't predict it. There could be a player who is fully healthy in his collegiate career and never finds his footing at the NFL level because of just bad injury luck. And there are players who have really bad injury luck at the collegiate level and can't stay healthy, but then end up being able to stay healthy at the NFL level. So to a certain point, it is predictive. To a certain point, it is not predictive, right? And so I think you have to accept that level of entropy and just take it case by case on an individual basis and just fully discern, like, are there long-term issues with this? In the case of Jordyn Tyson, I don't think there are distinct long-term issues with his specific injuries, but the fact that he couldn't stay healthy for a single year in college, right? That at the very least is a little bit of an issue. And I look at, for me, it doesn't take the prospect off my board outright, but in this specific class, I think it's a good example. Carnell Tate and Jordyn Tyson are very closely graded on my board, but Jordyn Tyson having the medical concerns, that is enough to move Carnell Tate over him for wide receiver 1 for me, right? If it's that close and you need a tiebreaker, it can serve as a tiebreaker. It's not a complete disqualifying factor, but and my board is different because I have to have every single prospect on my board just to communicate to people who are trying to learn about the class. An NFL team's board is different. They might have a prospect off entirely if he doesn't pass a certain threshold, right? So it's different exercises, but for me, it can serve as a tiebreaker. You got to take it case by case, but you also need to understand which injuries are potentially degenerative, have long-term implications, and which ones can potentially be worked back from 100%.
Give us like a couple day 3 prospects that can outplay their draft position.
Yeah, it's a good question, and one that I have way too many potential answers for. So I'm gonna pull up my board here. But there was one I watched. I updated his grade the other day, actually. Kentucky wide receiver Kendrick Law. I think he gets slept on a little bit. You don't always hear him talked about, but he has a top 75 grade from me. He's kind of a day 3 darling right now, so there's a chance he could go in the top 100. But after the combine, that is, I think he's going to test very well. He ran a 10.48 100-meter dash in high school, so the long speed is there. But 6'0", not 6'5". I misspoke there. 6 foot 205. That's where the 5 was. I jumped the gun with the 5. But he's dense. He's compact. He's explosive. He's pretty agile. He's got great run after catch ability. I think per True Media, he logs over 4 yards after catch over expectation per reception, which is insane efficiency. And then he also has, I think, a drop percentage of below 3%. So he's the sample size wasn't very big at Kentucky. And I think the passing offense was hamstrung a little bit by poor scheming and inconsistent QB play. Kendrick Law definitely has to keep expanding his route tree, I think. But I think encased within that, hidden within that, you have an athlete who has all of the route running building blocks that you want, an athlete that has an immediately translatable run after catch profile and is pretty solid at the catch point too. So I like Kendrick Law a lot. He's one of my guys in that valuation range. There's a few other players in the day 3 range who I would expect to potentially outperform their stock. I think Kevin Coleman Jr. from Missouri, wide receiver, is another one. Really natural separator. And again, a player who has very, very good analytical markers and played in a passing offense that was, again, hamstrung by poor QB play. At the Senior Bowl in particular, he really showed that 3-level separation framework. But then for a guy who's around 5'11", 175, so a little bit smaller, a little bit lighter, he's still really tough and composed at the catch point too, where he can make those really tight grabs over the middle, can serve as kind of a splicing factor against man coverage, and then has some rack ability too in space if you give him the ball. So I like Kevin Coleman Jr. a lot. Kyle Lewis from Pittsburgh is a really interesting player, kind of a hybrid nickel dime linebacker, 5'11", or almost 6 foot, actually, 5'11", 3/4, 224 pounds, 32-inch arms, explosive, agile, can play off man and zone if you need him to. He's got a ton of coverage versatility, but is also really explosive and agile on the lateral plane and on the attack. So a high motor player as well. And then Michael Taffy, the safety class in general, there's a lot of them. I think Michael Taffy is one. Zakee Wheatley is another. Bud Clark from TCU. All of those guys, I think you'll get really good value in that range. And you could get potential starters on day 3. So, I could go on and on. I think defensively in particular, this class is really strong, but also wide receiver, corner. Those positions have a ton to offer, and tight end is another one. A lot of depth of those positions, and particularly for the Washington Commanders who don't have that 2nd round pick, finding that value on day 3 is going to be key. I think there'll be plenty of opportunities for that.
All right, it's the day of the draft. Commanders are on the clock. Adam Peters gets a call from his wife to come downstairs. He said, call Ian. Let Ian make this pick. I trust him. Somehow, I don't know how, at 7, these are your available players. Jeremiah Love, Caleb Downs,
Okay.
Carnell Tate,
okay,
Arvell Reese, Jordyn Tyson, Sonny Styles, Mansour Delaney. Who is Ian picking?
That's a really tough. Oh my gosh. Oh my God. And you asked me this last time and I was like, oh my God, like I was frozen by it again. And I know last time I was sitting on the fence, I'm going to take Arvell Reese this time. Yeah, and I think, because I know I took Carnell Tate last time, but and that's the thing, like it'll be a flip of the coin for me, right? There are many different outcomes you can take. And I think part of it too, I may have swayed myself by talking about the day 2, day 3 wide receiver options. Like this class is really, really deep at wide receiver. It's deep at edge too, relatively deep in a different sense. I think the potential starting talent is a little bit deeper at wide receiver. I think at edge, you're more looking at guys who can really fulfill solid rotational roles early on, but I don't know if that level of early potential starting utility is there at the same volume at edge as it is at wide receiver. So I'm going to go with the depth this time. I'm going to kick wide receiver down the road. If we can get a solid player with that 71st pick, I'm all on board for that. Or if there's a really good defensive back still on the board, I'll take that too. But in this particular scenario, and again, I apologize to the viewers, it could change just like that. But I'm going to go with Arvell Reese here. We were talking about the game-breaking upside as an X factor. I think if you're Dan Quinn and if you're Durante Jones, specifically for Durante Jones, I think this is a really, really interesting fit because you look at his history, coaching under Brian Flores in Minnesota. I think it's going to be a really unique mesh of concepts and philosophies because Dan Quinn has always been kind of that, odd hybrid front type schemer who can also, but he also likes bigger edges, guys who have that size to really contend at the contact point and generate power from their momentum generation off the line from those exterior alignments. But again, he likes bigger guys in general. Durante Jones, on the other hand, working underneath Brian Flores with Andrew Van Ginkel. They drafted Dallas Turner round 1. Like they have Jonathan Grenard as well. But I think that Dallas Turner pick in particular shows like these guys like speed too, right? And Arvell Reese has the speed, has the power where he can be that catalyst from wider alignments. But I think he sizes up a lot better than his measurables would suggest in terms of power generation and play strength too. So I think Arvell Reese in an ideal scenario is a really, really good blend of both of the philosophies and the preferences that you get from hypothetically from Durante Jones, assuming he's taking some characteristics from Brian Flores, and then also Dan Quinn. So I think if Arvell Reese entered this environment with the dearth of long-term talent that the Commanders have at edge, you'd probably want to experiment with him there, right? But also, you can kick him back. He can drop into coverage if you need him to, and he can play from an off-ball Sam position and still attack downhill, still reset the line, prevent displacement, and make plays in pursuit and in the backfield. So I think it's a pick that has a ton of upside. It allows you to play the board later on at deeper positions. And if you insulate his development the right way, this can be the blue chip player that you need. So I'm a big fan of this fit in particular. The value is perfect. Ask me tomorrow. Like I said, ask me tomorrow. Maybe I lean Carnell Tate. But that's the beauty of this class. I think picking at 7th overall, you're at the tail end of that blue chip range, and you're still going to have options, right? If you were picking 2 or 3 spots later, you might not have had this opportunity. So I think the Commanders not having that second round pick hurts, but they're in a good spot. I think they can make the most of it, and I think this scenario is a perfect example of that.
Thank you so much for joining in. Just let us know some of the new projects that you're working on over there at PFSN.
Yeah, so PFSN, we're still working on more draft stuff every single day, but we've got the mock draft simulator that we are continually fine-tuning. We'll have an update coming here soon, right before the combine testing, so you'll be able to work through that. I've been writing dozens of player write-ups on day 3 the past 2 days, so if you like going through those scouting reports and making informed decisions for your draft projections, those will be there for you, and we're building that out. The goal is by the end of the month, or close to it, we'll have write-ups for every single player in draftable range, and you'll be able to sift through those. So that'll be a great information gathering thing. But we're also working on this NFL Draft Hub as well. That is supposed to be, ideally, it'll be your one-stop shop for everything. I started doing a sub-trait framework this cycle, which is a more refined version of the trait framework I was using cycles prior. But all of my grades and sub-trait grades will be on that NFL Draft Hub, along with scouting reports, along with combine results and measurements, along with MDS data from other users, so you can see who other teams are picking, and then plenty of other stuff too. So the idea, it'll be a one-stop shop. We're developing that, and it's getting better and better every day. And if you have, of course, it's still in the early stages. This is our first offseason working with it. So if you use it and you have any feedback that you want to send, or if you have any questions for me on the draft side, at IC_draft is my handle on X, formerly Twitter. So always feel free to reach out. I'll be responsive, and it's a fun time. But the MDS, the Draft Hub, those are the main things we're working on. It's taking a lot of our attention, and we're having a lot of fun doing it. So I appreciate you allowing me to talk draft a little bit more, and it's going to be a fun offseason, particularly for the Commanders.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. And 2 of those links will be in the description for anyone that want to check them out. Thank you so much. And we know your time is valuable for you to spend with us. We absolutely appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. Take care, buddy. Thanks to Ian Cummings from PFSN, NFL Draft Analyst, joining us today to discuss more draft. We appreciate your time. We know it's very valuable for you to spend with us. We absolutely appreciate it. Remember, do it because you love it, not because it loves you. One beat, one sound, one heart.